Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our next panel for the Halloween in July Scholarship Fundraiser. I'm honored to be here with Brian Keene for our Back in the Day Part 1. Brian, welcome, and thank you for hosting this multi-series panel. So I just wanted to say thank you, and we look forward to getting the discussion started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. Glad to be here. We good to go?
I believe so.
Okay.
I will disappear in a moment.
Okay. And he disappeared just like that. Hi, folks. Brian Keene. Before we get started, just want to remind you that since 2014, the annual HWA Scholarship Program has helped aspiring professional horror writers with their education in the field. This is a fundraiser for that program. So if you're watching us right now, if you click that little donate button, we'd really appreciate it. Even if you can just give $5 or $10, that will go a long way towards helping future horror writers. Now, tonight, we're not going to talk about future horror writers. We're going to talk to 4 living legends. I'm going to introduce each of them one by one. David J. Schow is the author of nearly 30 books and countless short stories, as well as comic books and nonfiction and other things. He's also a screenwriter whose credits include The Crow, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw 3, The Hills Run Red, an episode of The Outer Limits, 2 episodes of Masters of Horror, 3 episodes of Creepshow, and many more. He's the man who coined the term splatterpunk, and his honors include a J.F. Gonzalez Lifetime Achievement Award, a World Fantasy Award, a Rondo Award, and a Bram Stoker Award nomination, among others. So, David, welcome to the stream.
Thank you very much. Good 2 Rondos, by the way.
2 Rondos.
And a Saturn. Let's not go there.
I didn't want to list everything, and we're gonna be here all night.
No, that'll be the entire show, and I don't want to hog.
Up next, we have his sometime partner in crime, John Skipp, the author of over 20 books and many short stories. He's also a screenwriter whose credits include A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, Class of 1999, and Misty Beethoven, the musical, which won 2 AVN awards. You do not have an AVN award yet, right, David?
Not as of noon today, no.
John's other honors include 2 Bram Stoker awards, a Rondo Award, a J.F. Gonzalez Lifetime Achievement Award, and a Wonderland Book Award. Welcome, John Skipp.
Hi, everybody.
What's up, buddy? Oh, and he's gone.
Wow, that was a quick one.
That was quick. Right. While we wait for John, let's introduce our third guest tonight. Douglas E. Winter is the author of 7 books and what feels like a million reviews, interviews, and nonfiction articles, including celebrated biographies of Stephen King and Clive Barker. His honors include the HWA's Silver Hammer Award, a World Fantasy Award, an International Horror Guild Award, 2000's Best Suspense Novel of the Year by the Book of the Month Club, and many more. Please welcome Douglas E. Winter.
Hello, Brian.
Hello.
And hello, folks.
I want to see Skip's AVN Award fight it out with
the Silver Hammer
Month Club Award.
There's nothing like a naked Oscar.
And finally, joining us, Chet Williamson is the author of over 20 books and over 100 short stories, as well as comic books and much more. His honors include an International Horror Guild Award and six nominations for the Bram Stoker Award. He is also, of course, a renowned audiobook narrator. Please welcome Chet Williamson.
Hey, Chet.
There he is.
Oh,
and now here he is.
What did you do, Skip?
He will.
I didn't do anything. I'm just sitting here.
He's doing sorcery. He's doing arcane hand movements and stuff, and he's
Chet's going to appear by audio only, apparently.
Yes.
Okay. Well, while we wait for Chet,
the still picture.
I want to explain to our audience. We got a lot of folks watching tonight. I want to explain to you. This is not the old folks panel. Okay. John is only 10 years older than me. David's only a dozen years older than me. And Chet and Doug are both a few years younger than my parents. Okay, so this is not the old folks panel because I am not fucking old. Are you guys fucking old?
I've had girlfriends way older than you.
Yeah, so there you go. But These gentlemen are of a generation of horror writers for whom many things were different. All four of them are important voices who still have valuable things to say and whose impact influenced those of us who came along a decade or two later. So, if you're a fan of Joe Hill, Rath James White, J.F. Gonzalez, Brian Smith, Mary San Giovanni, Stephen Graham Jones, Monica O'Rourke, Tim Wagner, Josh Mallerman, Dwayne Straczynski, myself, or countless others, you owe these four gentlemen at least a partial debt because they are part of the reason we are doing this. So, guys, my first question, when someone summarizes your careers the way I just did, what is something that never gets mentioned that you wish people remembered about you? David, let's start with you.
Well, usually people boil you down to a very convenient epitaph. And in my case, the epitaph would be Splatterpunk guy, Fangoria guy, Outer Limits guy, Crow guy. And you know what? I'm happy with that because in this field especially, and I'm talking writing, not horror, all writing.
Yeah.
You don't get, the crime is that you don't get to pick the thing that makes you famous or makes you immortal. Other people get to pick it. So we got to go with what they say. And then we spend most of our time correcting everyone. No, it's not that. It's not that. The book's not horror. It's actually suspense. It's, it's a thriller or something like that. I'm going to fall back on the Harlan defense and say, as long as people say he was a writer, I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
John, what about you?
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing I could fucking never hear again for the rest of my life is Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Yeah, if there's one book that I wish everybody would read, it's The Emerald Burrito of Oz, which is the heartwarming tale of some people who wind up in Oz, which is actually real, and the government wants it to, and it's just the most fun I ever had writing a book.
A fine Babbage Press publication, by the way.
Thank you very much. Currently now housed with the Eraserhead nuts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chet, what about you?
I don't know. I've written over a number of different genres, and it's been my career goal basically to fail in as many as I could. And so, I think I've done that to a certain extent. But I have no idea what I'll be remembered for. If it's just that I was a writer, fine. If it was, a narrator of audiobooks, that's fine too. If it was just for my arrest record, that's fine too. or my style, my sense of style. Because yes. I wore this tonight to sort of celebrate how we all used to dress this way for our Zoom meetings in the 1980s.
That's so true.
Oh,
so,
Mary.
I had no Zoom meetings in the 1980s, Chet. I'm sorry.
You didn't, Doug.
You're in that part of the multiverse. Okay.
Yeah. Chet, do you in fact have leather elbow patches on that jacket?
No, I do not.
Okay, so we're not going that far back.
It's a straight Navy suit. No.
Are you wearing pants though?
So yeah, it's a fraud.
I dress like this all the time at home.
Yeah. No, we scored a stack of old Mystery Scene magazines, and in the back they'd always have photos from the conventions, and there's young Paulie Wilson and young Dallas Mayer and young Doug, and all of you are dressed to the nines. I mean, Paul kind of looked like Herb Tarlick from WKRP, but there was no black T-shirts and jeans. Everybody was,
When John Skipp first met me, I was wearing a black three-piece suit.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, and I wasn't.
No, and he was not. And he immediately tried to get as much alcohol into me as possible.
Yeah,
which was a good thing.
Yeah, I think I was wearing jeans held together with duct tape at that point.
Doug, what about you? What's something you wish people would mention? They don't.
Well, I tend to agree. I think David said it very well. That people are going to decide on their own what they're going to have to say about me. I always tried to be something of a whack-a-mole, to do something different each time out of the box. Yeah. And that's possibly why I ended up, without as much infamy as some, because, I didn't write a novel a year. I didn't write a nonfiction book a year. I didn't edit an anthology every year. I did all of those things. There are little things I like to remind people about. I was the guy who wrote the first zombie mashup. for John Skipp's anthology, actually, Less Than Zombie. But I suppose if there really is one thing, it would be that, I was the guy who said, horror is not a genre, it's an emotion. And then I set out to prove that, not simply to the people who write it, but to the mainstream in terms of criticism. And, HWA actually at one point in time had that put onto their T-shirts, which was kind of nice. And I suppose if I have to have an epitaph, I'm not planning on one, at least soon. That would be it.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I have that clipped to my bulletin board, actually, that quote. So, Chet brought up Zoom in the 1980s a moment ago, but of course, the internet did not exist when you guys were starting out. So, how did you find the markets you submitted to? Where did you get the submission calls? And more importantly, how did you find your friends, your tribe, your fellow writers?
What's a submission call?
What is the strange language of which you speak?
Well, let's talk about that, because that's gotta be...
I went to the nearest magazine smoke shop liquor store and bought magazines off the rack and submitted to those magazines. They were mostly science fiction magazines at the time. I spent about 15 minutes worrying my way through Writer's Market before I decided that wasn't going to work. Writer's Market, for those of you who don't know, is a giant book of all the published places you could submit fiction to back in the days of stamped self-addressed envelopes and no Xerox copies accepted because they were illegible, according to the people taking them. Literally, I went to the stores, I got the magazines, and I sent stories to those magazines.
Exactly right.
What about meeting each other? Now, John and David, of course, you guys meeting up at, I believe it was a World Fantasy Con is
Well, once upon a time, there was a magazine called Twilight Zone magazine. Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone magazine, not to put too fine a point on it. And there was no community except when you all sold a story to a magazine like Twilight Zone or Escapade or Cavalier or Gent or something like that. There was no community of writers there. But in Twilight Zone, they always had these little things in the front of the magazine that said, this issue's contributors. Well, we didn't know each other then. We were only on that page together. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say there was something of a community, though, based around conventions. A lot of them
and World Fantasy Con,
but a lot of the conventions were science fiction conventions, actually, at which horror was sort of set off to the side, but the people came to them. And then there were the writers who had evolved out of science fiction into horror, like Paul Wilson and Charlie Grant. And they were very accessible people and very inviting people. And they also, Charlie Grant being perhaps the best example, he began editing an anthology every year. And he was very open to seeing new people in it and very encouraging of new people. And those kinds of connections, can't be overemphasized. They were at that point in time some of the best connections that you could have, because they might not accept everything that you sent to them, but they would encourage you to send things, and they'd point out other opportunities to you, and they'd give you their own experience in terms of submitting, where to go with the kind of fiction that we liked. And that was also very helpful.
In that vein, I have a question for everybody. Go ahead, Chet.
That hasn't been mentioned and probably won't be, and that's APAs, Amateur Press Associations. In 1973, I believe it was, I joined the Esoteric Order of Dagon. And that is a thing with 30 guys and girls, and we would write our own zines. I used a mimeograph, the Spirit mimeograph that smelled so great. And we would send out to the official editor, and the editor would compile all of them, and you would get a mailing, which was one issue of everybody's magazine. And there were reviews. We did reviews of, horror and films and books. And it was a great way to make connections. And when I went to the first World Fantasy Convention in 1975 in Providence, I already knew a lot of people in the field because I had run into them and contacted them through these APAs, and they were great. And World Fantasy is really where it started for me. I went in 75 and 76.
And
met so many people and just stayed in touch with them forever.
Now, none of you really, well, Skip, I guess you still do, but the rest of you don't really do a lot of conventions anymore. Is it just a matter of don't have the time anymore? You're focused on other things in life, or has the scene changed?
Yes.
Next.
Okay. Let's talk about the scene changing. Of course, the great horror crash of the late 90s, everybody, or the mid to late 90s, everyone knows about that. All of you moved on to writing other things, particularly outside the genre. But eventually, one by one, you all came back, dipped your toe back in. Now, John, am I allowed to share our conversation?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Somebody's
at
gotta
that
do it.
point, I was doing pretty well with leisure books. I was getting a sizable advance compared to what a lot of other people starting with them were getting. And you came back and you sold a book to leisure, and I thought, well, surely they're going to pay him something comparable to what I'm getting. And am I allowed to share actual numbers?
Sure.
Okay. You reached out to me and you said they only offered me $2,000, and you were stunned. And I said, well, yeah, that's about standard what they're offering people. Personally, you're John fucking Skipp. I think you should get more than that. And you said, Brian, you don't understand. Back in the day, we used to get $200,000. and I hit the floor.
I didn't. It wasn't quite $200,000, but it was substantially more than two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shocked me. I'm curious, Chet, Doug, David, did any of you experience that same sort of shock when you sort of re-entered after going and doing other things?
Oh yeah. I mean, when we started out in the 80s, I mean, if you sold to Tor or to Avon or to any of the just regular horror lines, you would get anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 in advance. And when I started hearing what people were getting in advances today, I went, why bother to write? I mean, I usually spend a year writing a book, or used to, and it just isn't worth a year of my life for $2,000 or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous,
Unless you're doing reprints.
Same with short stories. I mean, we all of you guys were in Twilight Zone at one point, weren't you? Yeah, and we used to get fair amount from Twilight Zone for that, and it was a great market because you could go and if you wrote a good story, Ted Klein would buy it. Yeah. And I had a number of stories in there that I was really proud of and got reprinted and award nominated and everything. But the money was also good. It's
Chet beat us all in there. He was the first published in the magazine, I think, of all of us.
I don't know, October '81, I think.
Yeah.
81 was me as well. I mean, my very first World Fantasy Convention was in '82, and I walked in with my copy of Twilight Zone magazine because nobody had any idea who I was, and I didn't know much of anybody either. And you know who was really nice to me that first weekend? Doug. There were so many people who were just like, who the fuck is this kid? And Doug was really nice.
This Doug?
This Doug
was nice.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug.
Could you, Night Cry,
Thank you, John.
Some of those other, could you make a good $1 just writing short stories and Doug, in your case, reviews and such for that market back then? Or
no, well, certainly I could not writing reviews and not writing short stories. I should say, Brian, just not to disagree too much, but I don't ever believe that I left horror in any sense. I mean, during the 90s when things were difficult, I was editing Revelations. I was writing my book on Clive Barker. And when I wrote Run, that was a specific statement that there could be very horrific fiction that was not called horror fiction. And I was really pleased to see some people called it horror fiction, which, which was very pleasing to me, because my point was that this was what most people would call a suspense novel or a neo-noir novel. But it is, it has a level of horror that is beyond what's going on in a lot of contemporary horror fiction. I think the thing that I want to emphasize, though, about this whole time period that really gets lost and that people today may find just absolutely shocking is that once upon a time, there were people who were called mid-list authors. And the people who made a living, and they made a very good living without being so-called brand names. They could write, they could live off their writing year to year to year and do very well actually at it, without having any level of fame whatsoever. That they'd be on the racks and their books would sell, and they would sell in quantities enough that the publishers would keep paying them good money. That was the downfall. That's what happened in the 90s. That the downfall came in the 90s when the mid-lists were destroyed. But that was the one significant, I think, goal of a lot of people who are writing back in the 80s, was to free themselves from whatever they were doing, being a teacher, being a lawyer, being whatever they were doing, and become a writer full time. And there was actually the possibility of doing that without having a so-called breakthrough book or without having a 1 million copy bestseller.
Yeah,
I would, that mid-list income, as somebody who was there at the, I don't want to say the mid-list resurgence, because it was never a resurgence, but certainly with Leisure for a while, they had a respectable mid-list. But the indie market these days, there are a number of us who are making a mid-list living writing for the indie market. None of us have fame, etc. But you keep cranking out the next one, and you don't have to go get a day job. So it's still there. I think the mentality is still there. But for a lot of these indie writers, I don't think they realized that thing existed back then, but it was on bookstore shelves rather than on Amazon.
But now you can't make a living on mid-list writing one book a year. No.
Yeah, hell no. That's what I'm struggling with is, okay, in another 10 years, I'm not going to want to crank 4 of these out a year. How the hell do I, I don't have an answer yet.
Well, I was a writer for advertising, and I actually stayed in that on a freelance basis while I was writing my fiction. And I mean, I did that for years and years, and it was sort of fun, and it was like writing industrial shows, industrial theater. Don't get me started on that, but it's absolutely bizarre.
Just like Robert Bloch.
It paid well. And so if I didn't sell a book that year, that was fine, because I, made enough money freelancing in other ways.
Can I make a point to your earlier question here, Brian, which was, what was the deal with the magazine sales? New York City, big ass New York City publishing at the time always looked at the magazine markets as a field to cull novelists from, because they weren't interested in short stories. To this day, you can't sell a short story collection except to us at Cimarron Street. And if you were visible in the short story realm, if you were in Nightcry, if you were in Playboy, if you were in Twilight Zone magazine, they always came at you with a book contract.
Yep,
because that's the way that they saw getting in. And a lot of short story writers just aren't novelists.
Yes.
And you have to multitask, which leads me to the modern day answer part of the question, which is some of us went into showbiz.
Right.
Movies and TV specifically.
Right. Yeah. Which has a whole different set of challenges.
Because you can't get health insurance writing one horror novel a year.
Or a dozen short stories.
Yeah.
So Chet, I think with the exception of you, all of you have edited too. Prime Evil, Silver Scream. In fact, I think this is a Silver Scream reunion right here.
These are all contributors to my anthology sitting here right now.
Yeah. Book of the Dead, Revelations, which Doug mentioned earlier, Mondo Zombie. Something I'm curious about, having sold a number of anthologies here recently. Of course, the Joe Lansdale tribute drive-in and some other things. it's like pulling teeth to sell an anthology these days. What was it like back then?
It's
Like,
always
I
been like
want to
pulling
believe,
teeth.
Doug, that Primeval just started this bidding war, and you could pick and choose, Yeah, hey, there, you got your copy. I don't have mine. Yeah, but
Primeval prompted a bidding war for Revelations. So Primeval came as a really fascinating way. I was very fortunate. I was being interviewed by the Washington Post about my book on Stephen King and about some of the short stories I'd written. And they asked me what I wanted to do next. And Faces of Fear had just come out, and I was writing more and more fiction. And I said, what I'd really like to do is to produce a state-of-the-art anthology about the mainstream of horror, how horror should be viewed by the mainstream, and how the people who are working in it today are really significant literary talents. And this Washington Post book world ran this with this interview with me. And not that long afterward, my editor at NAL Signet called me up and said, hey, we saw this interview that the Washington Post did with you. Are you really interested in doing this kind of book? And I said, yes, of course I am. And they said, well, we'd like you to do that. And I said, well, talk to my agent. And at the time, I thought, and my agent thought, that what we were offered was, a really significant amount for a short story anthology, and it was. But little did anybody know at the time. I mean, I had high hopes for the book, but it's now considered the best-selling anthology of original horror fiction of all time, and it became sort of among publishing. It was one of the best-selling anthologies, pure and simple. And it became something of a legend. So by the time came that I was going to do Revelations, the book that became Revelations, I obviously had this kind of market credibility that, whether it was a proper one or not, but from the impact that book had, that we really could provoke a bidding war for the book. Which was at one point both obviously exciting and obviously endearing, but at the same time, you kind of sit back and think, but folks, this is a short story anthology, and there is some truth to the publishing dictum that short story anthologies don't sell, if only because publishers have that mindset themselves. So that when they have this, what I had done is put this concept together for that book, if you've read it, which structured it as essentially a novel written by 13 people, which I had hoped would enhance its sales potential. Did it live up to the potential everyone had for it? I mean, it lived up from my point of view, from the aesthetic point of view, from the literary point of view, from what I was trying to establish. From a commercial view, no. And certainly that was to a certain extent not surprising to me, because there was a significant bid made for it, and which again I was happy to have. But what happens then is the same sort of situation that we've seen all too many times in publishing, where someone gets a nice advance and then they publish their book, and now it's time for the next book, and the next book comes out and it doesn't quite live up to the first book, for which the significant amount of money was paid. So now when they come with another book, two things happen. It's either we don't want the book, or the offer drops significantly because they're looking at the numbers and they're counting the beans, and they don't really care. It's a product. They don't really care about the aesthetics of the book. They don't really care about its value as a piece of literature or as a piece of fantastic writing of horror fiction. They're looking at it as just a product that they're packaging and selling. And if it doesn't live up to the last one, you're not going to get paid as much, and it's going to go down and down and down. And we've seen that happen to so many people. It's such an unfortunate thing. And that was part of the destruction of the bid listers, was that very thing.
John,
you
experienced something like that as well, right?
Well, it happened to us with the collection Deadlines, which was supposed to be our fourth book after The Light at the End, The Cleanup, and then The Scream. And we had very, very, very good sales on those three books, and like two of them hit the low end of the New York Times bestseller list. And so then the fourth book was supposed to be the short story collection, and they're like, "Well, can you make it more like a novel?" We're like, "Well, what do you mean?" And they were like, I don't know, just, make it smell like a novel or something. I don't know. So we're trying to figure out how to fucking puzzle this out. And eventually just came up with this thing about this guy who couldn't sell his short story collection. So he killed himself, and all the stories wound up in the walls, and somebody read them. And that was the connective tissue, sort of the wraparound sort of affair. So we gave them their novel, but they treated it like a short story collection. And all of a sudden we went from selling 1 million copies to selling like 57,000 copies, and we never recovered. They treated The Bridge like a total failure walking in, and Animals was barely even considered. And that was the end of that. And it was, again, because they wanted it to be one thing while actually buying another thing, marketing it badly, and there we went.
Well, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
That if it only sells so many, then they cut back the print run for the next book. And of course it sells fewer than the one before. And then they do it again until you're left with nothing.
Yeah. Well,
And then if any of you had a 2-book deal with a hardcover publisher, they do 2 more insidious things, which is that once upon a time when you published a novel, you could expect a paperback a year later,
right,
when the second novel of the deal came out in hardcover. Well, number one thing they do, you don't get the paperback. Number 2 thing they do is they print the second book of the deal in a smaller trim size, so they don't even match up on the shelf, right? And at that point, you've been thrown under the bus.
And so where it wound up with me and with Craig was basically after Animals, it was like, well, you tried your cool, fun, splatterpunk, rock and roll kind of novels and everything, but could you maybe just write a nice novel with a nice dentist in a small town, and a scary thing happens to his family and everything. And it's like, yeah, I could do that, or I could just fucking kill myself. And I think I'm going to go towards the kill myself route, which is sort of what happened.
Now, this is not on the, we were talking earlier via email about, some of the things we wanted to hit on. This isn't on the list, but John, while you were talking about that, it made me remember for The Bridge.
Yeah.
You and Craig recorded the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I think I saw it advertised in Twilight Zone or Death Realm, one of the magazines back then.
Tango as well.
Tango, boom, instant sale for me at the time. Was that driven more out of creativity and your collective muses, or was that shit, we got to get our sales up?
No.
Let's think outside the box and do something to promote it.
No, it was totally about creativity. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the music for The Bridge started happening when Craig and I were extras in the Tom Savini remake of Night of the Living Dead. And I'm standing there the first night by the effects shed with John Vulich and Everett Burrell, the effects artist, watching the zombies go down the hill, smoking a big joint. And all of a sudden I start hearing this music in my head, and went back and wrote it. And when we didn't get to do the soundtrack for Night of the Living Dead, that shit started turning into The Bridge. It was just a matter of timing and where you put your creative juice. That's all that happened.
That's something else, not on the list, but something that is definitely ties in with this discussion. These days, of course, publishers don't do any promotion at all. Maybe some of your small presses do, but not the mainstream. So, it falls on the authors to do it. Back then, was it any different? I mean, could you rely on your publishers, to promote the Kill Riff, for example? Or, Chet, when your Ravenloft novel came out, did TSR get behind it and, shove it out there? Or were you stuck promoting even back then, pre-internet?
It depends. A lot of it depends on where your book is placed by the publisher. Like when I had Dreamthorpe come out, it was listed as an A title, not the super lead, but the second one. And I mean, they had a nice display and whatever it was, and then it got some promotion. But because they were trying to market it more as a popular horror novel, and instead it had a Jim Warren cover of a gigantic tree guy going, "Ah."
Right.
It was just like generic horror novel. Bang.
Oh yeah.
And it sold okay, but it sold like a generic horror novel. It didn't sell like what they wanted it to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the general, the general premise in New York publishing today is the same as it was then, which is that it depends on how much is invested in the book, how much is invested upfront as to how much publicity that they're willing to put into it. And usually it's not a great deal. And then of course there is that 1% of writers who get tours, who get a significant amount of advertising and the like. The difference, and it's a big difference between now and then, is that then you got significant free advertising courtesy of the publishers through review copies, because there were so many newspapers and so many book reviewers, and the publishers would push out review copies to those newspapers so that and occasionally to radio stations, so that you could get coverage that they didn't have to pay for other than putting the review copy together, but you could get your book out there and reviewed, oftentimes even if it wasn't the publisher's lead title. Or if it wasn't even the second title, they would push the books out to those different review outlets.
I saw the review copy lists at a couple of publishers in New York, and the lists of review copies that were sent out were staggering. I mean, the pages of just the places that they were sent were 15-page lists.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I have to just say, I was so stupidly fortunate in the way that things went for us, because when we sold The Light at the End, the Punk Vampire in the Subways novel, it took 1.5 years to release it. But when they released it, I was living in New York City. I had just, I didn't have to be a street messenger anymore, but I was kind of like in a weird limbo. And they had ads for The Light at the End on buses.
Yeah.
Was insane. I would be walking down the street and there would be an ad for our book on a bus or on a subway train. That lasted about 2 months, but in those 2 months, they sold a lot of books because they put a lot of muscle behind it. They did not put the same amount of muscle behind the second book. It did not sell 1 million copies. It sold a lot, but it was a disappointment. Then they did the Scream, and they did a big campaign on that. We sold a shitload of that, then deadlines, and all of a sudden we were gone. It was as if none of it had happened.
So you wait for sales, and then you wait to get paid.
Well, there's an intermediate stage, Brian, which is you could also tell how good your book was going to do based on its position in the publisher's catalog that they sent out, how big the ad was in the publisher's catalog. And there was another place, in addition to what Doug was talking about, which was the ABA, the Booksellers Convention. They gave away tons of ARCs at those conventions if you had a book with that with your publishing company. There was a lot of visibility. There was a lot of traffic. Lou Shiner and I sat in a line at an ABA autographing our copies for a line that went out the door and literally around the sports stadium.
Wow.
We were just signing until we were, bleeding.
And did you see results from that?
Yes. Unfortunately, with my first novel with Tor, The Kill Riff, the argument can be made that they gave away more reading copies than they sold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably true.
One thing I guess this holds true. Several years ago, Paul Tremblay and Mary and myself and a bunch of other folks, we were at Brown University reading through H.P. Lovecraft's letters. And there's cool stuff, David. I told you, letters from young Bob Bloch and stuff. But the one thing that echoed throughout his correspondence between him and all these other pulp era writers is they're waiting to get paid. They're waiting to get paid, and they're not getting paid enough. And they really wish, the check would come. And since then, my new hobby is to track down correspondence and go to universities, go through the archives. And this story gets told over and over again, and it's still being told. Well, WGA is on strike right now because writers still ain't getting paid.
I was about to mention that.
Yeah. So, that's something that hasn't changed. What are some other things from when you guys were starting out and now? What hasn't changed that you wish would change? other than, of course, us getting screwed on pay.
Well, as Donald Westlake pointed out, it's like they're still paying the same rates for short stories today that they were paying in the 20s.
Yeah.
That's a century ago, folks.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
So if you think you're going to make a career out of writing horror short stories, and unless you got a secret way into it that I don't know about, you will find it hard to pay your gas bill.
Yeah. But you can have a lot of fun.
You need a lot of gas, yeah.
Just a quick aside, Scott Edelman is in the chat. Chet, he appreciated your Jim Warren shout out, and he wants us to know that Jim is still with us and turned 93 years old yesterday.
Wow.
Wow.
That's great.
How about that?
Wow.
That's kind of a morbid segue, but it works.
You mean to the "why aren't we dead" question?
It's me.
Yeah.
It's me. You know how I do. We've all had, writer friends who either fallen behind or they faded away or they passed on. Who is somebody, because we had a lot of millennials, a lot of Zoomers watching this and watching later. Who is somebody not really remembered now that you wish people were still reading, a peer or maybe someone who mentored you early on? And
well, I don't know about remembered now, but I mean just somebody that you wish somebody was still reading. Can I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Michael McDowell, who's just being reprinted by Valancourt Books now, so you can go out and find his stuff, or Carl Edward Wagner.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And I have to say Charlie Grant, because Charlie was so important to my own career. A mentee of mine, I mentioned to her Charlie Grant, and she said, "Oh, the film reviewer," and I sort of wanted to scream. And unfortunately, I think he has been forgotten. Because he was very instrumental in the lives as well as the careers of so many writers of horror fiction back in the 1980s. He had a certain amount of controversy around him, and had sparred a little with John over the whole question of quiet horror versus loud horror. But he was a good-hearted, a very good-hearted man.
But I'll tell you, I got some of the best rejections I ever got in my life from Charlie Grant. I never. And he also Shadows.
Right. But he also, Shadows, he had at least 10, I think there are a total of 12 actually, anthologies under the Shadows title. And he was doing an anthology every year. And that was a great market for people because he was very open to new writers and very encouraging of new writers. So he's someone who, I wish would be much better remembered now. And
plus he was a good writer.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, Doug, I don't know if you remember this or not. I guess around 2005, a bunch of us did a signing in Falls Church, Virginia. And afterward, we all went to a party at author Matt Warner's condominium. And it was when Charlie he'd gone into hospice or he just passed. I can't remember which. But Mary, who Charlie mentored later in life, and Jesus Gonzalez and myself were kind of standing in the kitchen, and the three of us were just talking about, Jesus, I can't believe Charlie Grant didn't have better health insurance, and you happened to be walking by, you'd gotten a drink, and you looked at me and you said, now you know what keeps me awake at night, kid. And then you wandered off to talk to Bruce Newell and Paul Wilson. But that's really not something that has changed. We have writers recently who've been in the same situation. So I don't know. I had a point.
And we've lost, several people who were quite good. I mean, David and I had a very good friend, Melissa Mia Hall, and she passed away.
Died because
she could not afford insurance. It's just heartbreaking. And also, to witness it firsthand is particularly heartbreaking. And that hasn't changed.
The HWA has been trying to do things as far as getting people medical insurance and medical coverage. And I think that's great. But at the same time, it would be really nice if there were some arm of the organization that could teach people how to manage money. That you've got to invest your money, because even if you're successful, it's not going to last forever. And you've got to have something put by. And I mean, I don't know how to, go about. I think it's the suit that's making me say this today.
Yeah.
Seminar,
Green.
right?
Thanks, Mr. Green.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, so many times we see people use GoFundMe's to pay for their medical bills, and that's a damn shame. I mean, we contribute and we do what we can, but I don't know.
This goes all the way back, Chet. This goes all the way back to saying, listen, you need a class in high school that teaches people how to manage home finances.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
I mean, you got a lot of 30 and 40-year-old children out there that don't know how to manage their own finances.
Exactly.
But it's also
70-year-old children.
It's also, though, it's sort of a sad comment on the nature of the business, though. In terms of, we talked earlier about the advances getting smaller and smaller, and then the publishers basically showing you the door. That is the common experience in the publishing business. Those success stories we hear about are rare, and they're few and far between. And I'll never forget, and I won't mention the person's name, but one of the Borderlands boot camp graduates, we were very thrilled, received a 6-figure deal based on something that person had written and shown at the boot camp, and people had commented on. And I'll never forget Paul Wilson saying to that person, "Don't quit your day job." Because that's the nature of this business. That money was good money, but it was, if you just have spending it in an ordinary way, it's going to be gone in 3 years. Yeah. And it's a shame, but that is the nature of this business. It's something that people have to confront from the get-go and think about when they start earning money, particularly if they start earning some good money.
Yeah, I don't want to turn the panel into this. If you are a bright-eyed young hopeful who wants to make a career out of writing horror fiction, something that didn't exist before Steve King made it possible,
right?
Okay, but there is a chance in this universe that you won't get a chance to be Steve, and if that happens, you have to be prepared. You have to be battle ready. For this kind of thing. It's not like we're sitting here like an old guard trying to knock down anybody that has aspirations, because we all had aspirations. We still have aspirations.
Exactly.
We're not past it. It's like we're not out of the game yet, and we're having just as much trouble with our finances as you are. So I just remember that I got paid the first time that I sold a TV script, the first time that I sold a feature script. I got paid more money than I'd gotten paid for all of my prose writing up to that date. At that point, it was embarrassing. It wasn't even close. But now we're all on strike.
Yeah.
The Hollywood paradigm is burning to the ground as we sit here.
You brought up aspirations, and again, we didn't go over this beforehand, but I think it's a good closing question. And then if we have time, I want to get a couple questions from the viewers. But you're right. Every one of us still has aspirations professionally. Yeah. So, David, let's start with you since you brought it up. What do you still want to do? What do you still want to achieve?
One of the things I want to achieve is what I'm achieving right now, thanks to the good offices of Cimarron Street Books. Since the pandemic started, we started reissuing my short story collections, which was something that I was personally heavily very vested in, because I think every writer wants those books to come out in a uniform edition to line up on the shelf where the spines match.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what we're doing. We put out 11 books in a year and a half. The new one is on deck to be released in about a week, which is a reprint of a book I did called DJ Sturbia. And just to continue, and in the process of doing those books, new little interim books have suggested themselves. And so, a lot of people are not only forced to become their own publicists, they're forced to become their own publishers at this point. You have to. Brian's done it. John's done it. and it's like it's part of the equipment that you have to kind of survive this battlefield at this point. And that's what I'm interested in doing, because technically, I mean, as far as the outside world is concerned, I'm retired. I'm a retiree on a pension. I have a pension thanks to the Writers Guild. Thank you very much.
Yay.
But yeah, it's like that was one of my targets back when I started writing. My targets were to get books published, to exist in that world. And if I don't do anything else before the end, I did it. I've accomplished what I wanted.
John, what about you? I'm guessing something musically, perhaps?
Well, I announced, I guess it was last year, that I'm not going to write any more books.
Right.
That I'm going to spend however many years I have left. I refuse to die before making 3 feature films that I'm proud of. And so that is my entire fucking thing right now, is I'm just leaning into that. That's what I do all day, every day. And I'm going to make some. And then I'm writing music for the movies that I'm making. And that's, I mean, one of the best things about COVID was I finally learned how to play the piano. I'm not great, but I can actually play a piano and write on it now and everything. And yeah, so I'm doing shit that I really, really want to do. I'm crossing off some boxes that I have not yet crossed off. It makes me crazy that I tried for so long and haven't made one yet. And I think part of it was because I kept going back to books that were not feeding me and that people had kind of stopped reading. And those books are still there, and I'm really, really proud of them. But fuck it, I'm going to make a couple movies. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Folks, if you have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and type them in the comments now. Chet, what about you? What's on your bucket list you still want to achieve?
Well, the Nobel, of course. But other than that, no, I've kind of, my writing has almost completely stopped. I do a short story every now and again, but there's a novel that I've been messing with for years, and it doesn't go anywhere.
Same here.
Yeah, and I've got 2 novels that I'd written earlier that I really like, but they're not right for markets.
Okay.
So I'm just like, I just want to record audiobooks and interpret your guys' wonderful voice. Because Brian, I've done you. Dave, I've done you. John, I've done you.
Mm-hmm.
They say have a side hustle, and the one you've got is a good one.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a fun one, and I enjoy it.
Yeah. I have to, Doug, and we'll get to you in a second. I'm going to give you more time to think about yours. I have to tell a quick story. Mike Lombardo, young filmmaker, director, he thought Chet was just the audiobook guy, and had a party here at the house, and Chet was in the laundry room getting a beer because I had the beer cooler in there, and somebody explained to Lombardo that Chet had written his favorite Aliens comic book, and Lombardo makes a beeline in there, pins Chet in the corner. Your wife came out 20 minutes later and said, "Can you go check on him and make sure he's okay?" Yeah. But the rest of the day, he said, "I thought he just did audiobooks. I had no idea."
That's awesome.
Chet does Crow books, man.
I did. I've done 2
More than me.
Yeah.
Doug, what about you?
Well, I have another life as an attorney, and which I'm fortunate enough to have. And over the past decade, I've spent a lot of time that would otherwise be devoted to writing to trying to put those talents in service of different social causes that are important to me. As one of the lawyers who challenged the ban on same-sex marriage in Georgia, and those kinds of pursuits have their own rewards that aren't financial. They aren't, it's not a pat on the back. You just feel like you've done a job, and hopefully you've done it well, and hopefully you've done it well enough to help people who are less fortunate than you, or who are for various reasons downtrodden, or for various reasons just unfortunately considered less than ordinary citizens.
Yeah.
So, but I'd like to think I still have one at least one original new book in me. I'm sort of in a position like Chet where I have wrestled with one for quite some time, and haven't had what they call a positive finish. So, but I'm hopeful that that it will be there. In the meantime, in terms of things that are happening, I know that finally my trilogy of zombie stories, zombies mashups, American Zombies, finally coming out after about a decade of waiting. And John is in no small part one of the instigators of those stories. So I'm glad to see that happening. I've also I've been working for several years now on just a project dear to my heart, which is a translating and editing a collection of short stories by the late Italian horror film director Lucio Fulci. Who befriended me in the waning days of his life, and I became very close friends with his daughter. And that is finally almost reached fruition. I hope it's going to be out this year or next at the latest.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome. All right, we got time for.
Throw one.
Yeah, go ahead, Chet.
Manly Wade Wellman, who was a wonderful writer, who was often forgotten today, but he wrote a thing about writing that I loved, and it was something along the lines of, when the stories stop coming, maybe it's time to stop writing the books and just start reading them. Go to the bottom of the hill, and maybe there will be a soft place to sit.
That's nice.
I love it.
Wow. I'm a
That's
huge
nice.
Wellman
That's
fan.
very
I've never read that quote.
Yeah,
What's that
I
from?
wish I could find it. I cut it out and put it somewhere, and I lost it, and I haven't been able to find it since. But
Well,
it's
that's beautiful. All right, so we'll do two questions from the audience. Anne asks, "Is it impossible to reprint older anthologies today because of rights issues? I'd love to get new editions of some iconic anthologies." Hang on a second. Give me 1 second here. "I'd love to get new editions of some iconic anthologies, but I know it might not happen because of literary estates."
Can I go first?
Yes, I'm
Please.
looking at you.
We just reprinted Silver Scream, which all three of these guys are in, after it's been out of print for 32 years, in a brand new edition with the cover that I always wanted since the late 80s on the book, and you can get it at Amazon. So yeah, it's possible.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, and so much of those is, as I'll speak with my lawyer head, is a question of the contract, the original contracts, the original license agreements with the individual writers. I mean, if they conveyed the right to do that, then by all means, it's possible.
Yeah, I'd love.
But sometimes those books get tied up, of course, with the publishers. The publishers have the rights, and you've got to get the rights back from the publisher. As the editor, you've got to get it back from the publisher, which can be a hassle.
I mean, as a fan, I'd love to see Whispers reprinted, and Stuart Schiff's Whispers, Charlie Grant's Shadows, Night Visions. I'd love to see Night Visions continue.
Oh, yeah.
But all right. Other question, last question. This one's kind of a serious question. What is everyone's perspective on the incident that prompted Brian's essay, and in turn this stream, the Stuart Schiff reaction comment of feeling forgotten? Now, I want to correct that. I wasn't saying that Stuart felt forgotten. It wasn't Stuart's reaction. I was talking about Mort Castle sort of feeling forgotten, which I think is valid in Mort's case. Mort did some important things. Maybe he should have read the room a little bit, and that's not anything I wouldn't tell Mort. But that is what inspired this series. As I said at the start, we are in a time where there are more published horror authors than there's ever been in the history of the industry. It's very hard to stand out, but it's not only hard for new writers, it's hard for these people who've been doing this 30, 40 years.
Sure.
I do think they have valid concerns in that regard. So I guess what is everybody else's thoughts on that, or do you have an opinion you want to express on that?
I would just like to say that maybe you give out more than one award a year, and you sort of parse it out across categories in such a way that people are being remembered, because it is such a large thing. It'd be more like a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing than like once a year or somebody gets hauled up in their wheelchair with their fucking colostomy bag hanging because everybody's forgotten about them for the last 80 years.
All right. I don't know if Wrath James White is watching the stream or not. I'm not supposed to say this yet, but Wrath, fuck it, I'm gonna. I would like to announce that starting next year, the Splatterpunk Awards will be giving away more than one J.F. Gonzalez Lifetime Achievement Award per year.
That's horrible. Why would anyone suggest that?
Not quite Rock and Roll Hall of Fame dais, but we are going to give away multiple ones.
Like I also think one disadvantage that older writers have, the ones like us, we've been there, done that. We don't. I think we don't feel as great a need to have a significant social media presence. Certainly, I don't, because I've always been the kind of person who thinks, well, my work should stand as my work, and I should be remembered for my work rather than for how I publicize myself. But these days, if that happens, then there's this whole, type of situation where you're sort of gone and forgotten. If you're not seen and not heard, you're forgotten. I mentioned that to Megan Arcuri. I'd hoped to go to the Stoker Awards this year, since I had great fun when I went 2 years ago. And she had said, you really should come, And I really wanted to do it. And then, circumstances prevented it. And I said to her, I kind of feel sometimes if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. And I think that's generally true about older writers and their approach to their careers. They're not, not trying to churn up information about their past and not trying to promote their past. And they don't have as many new things to promote. So they're not out there shouting from the rooftops, hey, I'm here still.
I always think about a thing that Chris Rock said at the MTV Music Awards about 30 years ago when he was talking about how Sir Mix-a-Lot wasn't mixing as much as he used to, and how the saying was, used to be here today, gone tomorrow. Now it's here today, gone today. So, and that was 30 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, shit, if there's more people, when you're already in a pre-obsolescent, disposable culture, yeah, the odds are good that the only people who are going to remember were the ones that actually cared in the first place, or the people who actually got it handed to them by somebody else and said, check this out. And they went, oh, this is cool. And the weird thing is, you don't know 100 years from now which completely obscure artist that none of us ever talked about is going to be the thing that everybody's fucking like rocking over at that point, because it will hit a nerve. Things happen because they happen. It's just... There is not an actual rhyme or reason to this stuff. It's like, the ocean waves and the universe peoples, and people come in and they do stuff, and sometimes it catches and sometimes it don't.
Well, also, there's no guarantee of immortality, no matter how great the thing that you're writing is.
Yeah.
It's like there's, that's not the deal that we signed on for, and that's nothing that we ever expected. There's no guarantee that you're going to be remembered for any reason. You just got to play as many cards as you have. Oh, unless you shoot somebody famous, then you got a good chance.
Yeah, but they'll even forget that shit.
Awards are nice, but they're as ephemeral as everything else in this business. And it's like, if we were there, we had a lot of fun while it was happening. We were the rock stars of our time in that small genre that we liked. And, sometimes that should be enough. If we don't constantly keep our name and our work in the public eye, and I don't have the energy or the desire to do that anymore, then let the chips fall where they may. If you want to remember me and read some of my books, that's great. And
I've got a Chet Williamson shelf.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, but if you don't, that's fine too. Maybe somebody will find them 20 years from now.
Well, and how many readers do you need? What number would make you happy? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, as long as one person is looking at this stuff, one's enough sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, and look, closing thought. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, you guys were absolutely rock stars to me. I've told each and every one of you that individually. You were rock stars to Jesus Gonzalez, Brian Smith, Mary San Giovanni, Wrath. So, thank you from us for blazing the trail. And I hope the younger viewers watching understand that you blazed that trail. And if they don't, then they need to start over from the beginning and watch this again, and then go out and buy some of your books.
That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. And folks, if you're watching again, please support the HWA Scholarship Fund. It's been doing good things for up and coming professional horror writers since 2014, but they can't do it without your help. We will see you back here next Sunday, I believe, with Linda Addison, Ellen Datlow, Stephen Resnick-Tem, and a couple other surprise guests.
Beautiful.
So,
Great.
all right.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Great to see everybody.
Same here.
Hey, John.
Now, I don't have control of this StreamYard, so we can't end.
We're stuck here.
Yeah, we're stuck. All right. So this is the